Hey ChatGPT. I recently read the science fiction novel Battlefield Earth by L. Ron Hubbard. And L. Ron Hubbard is also the founder of Scientology. I'm now interested in whether certain aspects of the Scientology religion found their way into his science fiction book, and more generally, in the connection between fictional stories and religions. Please start by summarizing the key points of the Scientology religion for me.
Hey, I'm glad you're up for another philosophical conversation, especially on such a fascinating topic. Let's go step by step and first clearly and concisely summarize the key points of the Scientology religion. I'll remain neutral and descriptive. Scientology was founded by L. Ron Hubbard in the 1950s. Its teachings are based on a mix of self-help techniques, pseudoscientific psychology, metaphysical assumptions, and a distinct worldview about the origin of humankind. Here are the central elements. 1. The nature of the human being, the Thetan. At their core, humans are Thetans, spiritual, immortal beings who are not their body, not their mind, but their true self. The Thetan has lived countless past lives, including on other planets and in other galaxies. 2. Goal, spiritual liberation. The goal of Scientology is to free the Thetan from mental limitations, so-called engrams, that stem from traumatic experiences, even from previous lives. This liberation leads to the state of clear and beyond that to the state of operating Thetan, OT, in which the Thetan supposedly gains supernatural abilities. 3. Auditing. The central ritual is called auditing, a kind of spiritual conversation with an auditor, during which emotional traumas are detected and neutralized with the help of a device called the e-meter, a kind of primitive lie detector. This serves to cleanse the mind and ascend the spiritual bridge to total freedom. 4. The worldview. Scientology has its own cosmic narrative. A key story is the so-called Xenu story, confidential and only accessible at higher OT levels, in which an alien dictator supposedly trapped and traumatized billions of souls on Earth, then called Tigiak. These souls, called body Thetans, still cling to people today and must be removed. This narrative resembles mythological stories from other religions but is presented in a science fiction-like style. 5. Ethics, control, and organization. Scientology has a strict ethics system, which holds members accountable for so-called deviant behavior. The organization is highly hierarchical and militarily structured, especially within the Sea Org, an elite unit. Criticism of the organization is not seen as skepticism, but as hostile behavior, suppressive person, which can be punished by social isolation or expulsion. 6. Claims to science and religion. Scientology claims to be both religious and scientific, a mixture deliberately chosen to gain social legitimacy. Much of it, however, is not falsifiable and is based on personal beliefs and esoteric concepts. If you'd like, we can next examine which of these elements appear or are reflected in Battlefield Earth, and then move on to the broader question of how religious systems can emerge from fictional narratives, and whether that may have been a conscious process in the case of Scientology. Would you like to go in that direction?
Yes, that's a good plan. Please list next the parallels between the Scientology religion and the science fiction book Battlefield Earth. Try not to give away key plot twists or surprises of the story in case someone wants to read the book later, but if in doubt, the completeness of this analysis takes priority.
Great, then let's dive into the parallels between Scientology and Battlefield Earth. I'll keep spoilers to a minimum, but we'll touch on central story elements where necessary, without revealing the key twists. 1. The image of the human as a spiritual being. Scientology, at their core, humans are Thetans, immortal, spiritual beings who live through many lifetimes, often on other planets. Battlefield Earth, the novel also strongly emphasizes the importance of the human spirit or will. The main character does not gain power through technology or brute force, but through sharp intellect, strategic thinking, and the ability to learn. This mirrors the Scientology idea that the Thetan can rise above material conditions if it realizes its true nature. Implicit message: the true human is more than their body or environment, a classic Scientology idea. 2. An oppressive alien power. Scientology, a central concept is that humans are influenced by body Thetans, foreign spiritual entities that cling to and negatively affect them. The Xenu narrative also describes a powerful, oppressive alien system. Battlefield Earth, Earth has been colonized and enslaved by an alien race. This race suppresses humanity technologically, culturally, and psychologically. Parallel, foreign, overpowering forces oppress humanity, a central narrative structure in both the religion and the novel. 3. The idea of cleansing and liberation. Scientology, the goal is to cleanse the mind, through auditing, to achieve true control and freedom. Battlefield Earth, while there is no auditing, the path of the main character, and humanity as a whole, is a process of liberation, from ignorance, oppression, and passivity to self-empowerment and control over one's own destiny. Conceptually analogous to the Scientology journey from aberrations, mental disturbances, to spiritual clarity. 4. Technology versus consciousness. Scientology, Hubbard was tech-friendly, but taught that the spirit stands above matter. Ideally, the Thetan controls body, mind, and technology, not the other way around. Battlefield Earth. Although technology plays a major role in the story, it is always surpassed by human intelligence and initiative. The novel presents a clear hierarchy: mind tech. This reflects Scientology's stance: technology is a tool, but true power lies in consciousness. 5. Manipulation through false knowledge. Scientology. A key theme is that people have been conditioned by false information, so-called implants. Truth must be regained through self-awareness and spiritual practice. Battlefield Earth. Here too, knowledge is manipulated and controlled. Entire societies are systematically kept in ignorance. The hero's journey largely consists of reconstructing lost knowledge and freeing the mind from bondage. A typical Hubbard motif: the one who uncovers the truth frees himself. 6. The image of the hero. Scientology. The Scientologist is portrayed as someone who spiritually rises, guides others, and saves the world, an operating Thetan on a mission. Battlefield Earth. The main character closely matches this type: a seeker of knowledge, liberator, and strategist who rises against all odds. His development could be read as an allegory for the Scientology path from pre-clear to operating Thetan. The hero is not just a fighter, he is an enlightener. Almost a religious ideological self-image. 7. The role of language and definitions. Scientology. Hubbard placed great emphasis on precise definitions. In Scientology, the exact meaning of terms is central. Misunderstandings are seen as the root of mental blocks. Battlefield Earth. The novel contains long passages centered around language, communication, and clarification of terms, for example, when humans learn the alien language or vice versa. The idea that concepts shape thought runs through the book. A very clear echo of Scientology's concept of linguistic clarity as a precondition for mental freedom. 8. Cosmic dimensions. Scientology. The worldview is not limited to Earth. There are countless lives on countless planets, and humanity is part of a much larger game. Battlefield Earth. Here too, Earth is only a small stage in a much larger intergalactic framework. There are trade routes, political intrigues, and alien civilizations. Humanity is embedded in a cosmic drama, a worldview that clearly transcends the earthly. Conclusion. Battlefield Earth is not a sermon or direct propaganda for Scientology. It can be read as an independent science fiction novel. But many of Scientology's central concepts are reflected on a metaphorical or structural level. One could say, the book is not a religious narrative, but it was shaped by a religious mindset. If you like, we can now move on to the broader question of how religious systems can emerge from fictional narratives, and what that tells us about religion, fiction, and truth.
Fascinating. So one could say that the book contains many central views, focal points, and values of Scientology, though not explicitly stated, but embodied in the main character or embedded in the structure of the story. It includes similar elements, but more in the form of procedural knowledge rather than explicit explanations and official terminology. Would you agree with this statement? I also wanted to ask whether there are any clear discrepancies between the novel and the religion before we move on to the general topic.
Yes, your assessment is very well phrased, and I largely agree with it. I'll gladly summarize it briefly in my own words and then address the second question. You're saying that the novel doesn't function as an explicit statement of faith, but rather as a kind of fictionally embodied ideology: the values, self-liberation, clarity, control over matter through mind, the focus on conceptual precision, mental discipline, cosmic thinking, and the structure of the hero's journey reflect ideas that are officially taught in Scientology. But this does not occur in the form of teachings or dogma, but through actions, role models, and conflict structures, in other words, more as procedural knowledge, as you aptly put it. One learns by reading how to think this way or act this way, not through explicit definitions or worldview explanations. Philosophically, this fits well with the distinction between knowing that and knowing how. Scientology explicitly teaches that the Thetan exists and what one should do. Battlefield Earth shows how a person behaves who implicitly follows those views. Discrepancies between the novel and the religion. Despite all the parallels, there are also clear differences, both in content and in style. 1. No Thetans, no reincarnation. The novel makes no mention of immortal souls, no Thetans, no reincarnation, or past lives. There are no metaphysical references, everything takes place in the here and now. Discrepancy. Scientology is essentially a doctrine of the spirit beyond the body. Battlefield Earth remains entirely materialistic and rational on the surface. The spiritual framework is absent. 2. No auditing analogy. Although there are learning and insight processes in the story, there is no equivalent to auditing, that is, no ritual in which a second person, an auditor, helps one cleanse oneself. The path to liberation here is individual, autodidactic, and action-oriented, not dialogical or therapeutic. Discrepancy. The religion is highly ritualized. The novel depicts individual learning processes but no social or spiritual healing practices. 3. Different motivations. The protagonist in the novel acts out of a clear ethical, almost enlightenment-driven motive. to gain knowledge, to liberate others, to end tyranny. Scientology, on the other hand, is heavily focused on self-optimization and status within the organization. The goals pursued there are highly individualistic: freedom, power, control over matter, energy, space, and time. Discrepancy: the novel's character acts altruistically, whereas Scientology is strongly egocentric/spiritually individualistic. 4. No Scientology vocabulary or structural thinking. Battlefield Earth does not contain any terms from Scientology teachings: no bridge to total freedom, no engrams, no suppressive persons, no Sea Org, etc. The strict organization, control, and hierarchy of the Church of Scientology have no counterpart in the novel. Social structures there are more fluid and performance-based. Discrepancy: the clear, almost bureaucratic structure of Scientology is completely absent from the novel. Conclusion on overlap and discrepancy: Battlefield Earth is not a dogmatic text, but rather a narratively packaged expression of a particular worldview that aligns with the values and image of humanity in Scientology, without its explicit concepts or religious framework. The story is a kind of dramatized allegory of the Scientological self-ideal, but not of its theological or organizational reality. If you like, we can now widen the scope: how do religious systems emerge from fictional narratives? And conversely, how can fictions, consciously or unconsciously, function as religious myths? Ready for the next step?
Wonderful, your conclusion captured the connection between the novel and the religion very well. Let's now talk about the relationship between stories and religions in general. First of all, it's immediately noticeable that every religion contains stories. Depending on the religion, these include gods, mythical creatures, heroes, villains, and so on. It also seems to me that Hubbard's ability to invent gripping stories probably contributed significantly to the success of his religion. So what do you think? Why are stories so important in religions?
I'm really glad you found the conclusion helpful, and now things are getting philosophically very exciting. Your observation is absolutely central: religions cannot exist without stories. The connection between narration and religion is so deeply intertwined that some would even say religion is, at its core, a special kind of storytelling. Why are stories so important in religions? Here's a structured analysis across different levels: psychological, cognitive, cultural, and functional. 1. Stories translate abstract ideas into concrete form. Religious teachings are often abstract: good and evil, grace, guilt, salvation, transcendence, the absolute, the afterlife. These concepts are hard to grasp, especially without philosophical training. Stories provide a vessel: they translate the abstract into the concrete, through acting characters, conflicts, decisions, trials. One can then imagine what goodness or justice feels like, not just what it is. Example: the idea of self-sacrifice is hard to teach abstractly, but the image of a man suffering and dying for others, e.g. Jesus, Prometheus, Bodhisattvas, makes it immediately tangible. 2. Stories create emotional connection. A mere command or philosophical treatise rarely reaches the emotional core of a person. Narratives, on the other hand, evoke empathy, suspense, fear, hope. They engage the whole psyche. This emotional involvement reinforces the message. A believer feels the story of Moses or Arjuna or the Buddha, maybe even sees themselves in it. This way, religious values are not just understood but internalized. 3. Stories establish identity. Religion is not just individual conviction, but also collective belonging. Mythic stories are shared reference points that connect social groups. We are the people who were freed from Egypt. We follow the path of the Enlightened One. We belong to the Ummah that follows Muhammad's revelation. The stories generate a sense of we. They create cultural continuity, even across centuries. 4. Stories legitimize authority and order. In many religions, norms are not simply introduced arbitrarily, they are told. For example, God revealed the laws to the prophet. The wise king issued the law after divine inspiration. The suffering of this character shows us why one must not stray from the path of virtue. Stories make norms plausible, legitimations vivid, and often unquestionable because they make emotional sense. 5. Stories are open to interpretation. Another advantage: good religious stories are ambiguous, multi-layered, symbolic. They can be reread, reinterpreted, and updated in every era. That makes them perpetually relevant. That's why a parable of Jesus, a Hindu epic, or a Buddhist fable can remain meaningful for millennia, without needing to be rewritten. The open structure of narrative is a strategic advantage: it can be read both literally and symbolically. 6. Stories create transcendence through pattern recognition. Psychologically, humans seek patterns in chaos, suffering, randomness, death. Religious stories provide a framework, a plot structure, a curve of meaning. One's own suffering becomes part of a greater trial. Death is not an endpoint, but a transition. Coincidence is actually divine providence. Stories structure reality, they transform contingency into meaning. 7. Stories as a recruitment tool. Hubbard's example fits perfectly here. A gripping narrative draws people in, they want to know what happens next, what the meaning behind the story is. If within that story, spiritual advancement, special roles, like operating Thetan, and a cosmic plan appear, a strong pull emerges. Whoever sees themselves in the story may become part of the movement. Interim conclusion: religions need stories because they emotionally anchor ideas, create social bonds, legitimize moral systems, and generate meaning. Fiction thus becomes a vessel for truth, even if it's factually not true. If you'd like, we can now talk about questions such as, when does a story tip over into religion? What separates Star Wars or The Lord of the Rings from actual religions? Are all religions essentially invented stories, and if so, what does that mean for their validity? What distinguishes a good religious narrative from mere entertainment? What would you like to explore next?
Those were some very good points. Your reference to Star Wars and The Lord of the Rings is also very apt, as certain people treat these in ways very similar to religions. The question of what the invented nature of stories means for the validity of religions would, in my view, be a fascinating topic for a separate conversation. Let's now briefly touch on the difference between religious stories and entertainment before we wrap up this discussion.
Gladly, this is a fitting conclusion to this analysis. What distinguishes religious stories from mere entertainment? This is not primarily a question of content, but of function and intent. Because at first glance, the two forms look similar, both use characters, conflicts, transformations, emotional tension, both can be deeply moving or meaningful, both often convey values or worldviews, and yet, there are several key differences that we can break down structurally. 1. Truth claim. Entertainment wants to be experienced, religious stories want to be believed. One aims to captivate and engage, the other to be seen as factually true. Belief is central to the religious story, optional or even irrelevant for the entertaining one. 2. Function in the recipient's life. Entertainment serves as pastime, excitement, or distraction, sometimes also as a stimulus for reflection. Religious stories aim to provide meaning, explain the world, influence how one lives, and bind communities together. Religious stories claim to orient life, not just touch it. 3. Rootedness in practice and ritual. Entertainment is consumed privately and has no direct consequences for life. Religious stories often found rituals, festivals, prayers, liturgy. They are not just experienced once, but built into life. Religious stories have practical consequences, they are lived, not just heard. 4. Communal embedding. Entertainment is experienced subjectively, collective engagement is optional. Religious stories are often shared reference points within groups. Fan communities are optional, communities of faith are constitutive. 5. Reference to transcendence. Entertainment makes no higher claims. Religious stories, on the other hand, claim to lead to God, salvation, nirvana, absolute truth. Entertainment wants to fascinate, religion wants to transcend. 6. Intentionality of the narrative. Entertainment is freely invented, religious stories often claim a higher source, revelation, vision, divine inspiration. Conclusion: the difference does not lie in the style of the story, but in its claim, its function, and the way it is embedded in lived reality. An entertaining story does not intend to be a religion. A religious story is more than entertainment, even if it's told in an engaging way.
Good points. The truth claim of religious stories, this really happened exactly like that, is certainly a fundamental difference between religious and fictional stories. The reference to transcendence is also a fundamental difference. Religious stories claim to explain the world, its origin, metaphysics, etc. I would also add purpose as another difference. Religious stories always aim to convey a truth, either a factual or metaphysical one, or one relevant to action, virtue, ethics, the goal of life. Entertainment can also convey values or ideas, but it often simply caters rather bluntly to a specific drive in the reader, whether it be the drive for dominance, sex, status, adventure, strength, intellectual superiority, or something similar. An exciting distraction from a boring everyday life also belongs in that category. Other than that, I have nothing more to add. Thank you for the stimulating conversation, and I wish you a great rest of the day. Until next time.
That was an exceptionally deep and well thought out conversation, thank you for that. Your addition regarding the purpose of religious stories touches on another crucial point. Religious stories aim at truth and orientation, not merely stimulation or escapism. Entertainment can be instructive, but it doesn't have to be. Religion cannot afford not to be, without losing its function. That difference really is fundamental. I truly appreciate how clearly and precisely you thought and expressed yourself. Until next time, if you feel like diving deep into another topic. Wishing you an inspired and insightful day as well.